My name is Sarah, I'm 34, and I just discovered the real reason my parents never invited me on family vacations. What started as childhood disappointment turned into decades of exclusion, and last week I found evidence that shattered everything I believed about my family. The truth wasn't just about favoritism or sibling rivalry, it was about money, inheritance, and a conspiracy that's been hiding in plain sight since I was 12 years old. Now that I know what they've been doing behind my back, they're about to learn what happens when you underestimate the daughter you tried so hard to erase. Before we dive into this family revenge story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you're ready to see how this 20-year deception finally gets exposed, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about family karma coming full circle. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I always knew something was different about me and my family. While my older brother Jake and younger sister Emma seemed to effortlessly blend into our parents' world of country club memberships and weekend getaways, I was consistently told that family trips were not really my thing or that there wasn't enough room for me to join. Every summer, my parents would pack up the car for week-long vacations to Martha's Vineyard, Napa Valley, or ski trips to Aspen. Jake and Emma would come back with tanned faces and stories of fancy restaurants, while I spent those weeks at my grandmother's house or summer camps. My parents always had explanations. I got carsick easily. I didn't like fancy food. I preferred staying home with books rather than outdoor activities. As a child, I believed these explanations. I convinced myself that maybe I really was different, maybe I really wouldn't enjoy those trips. But as I grew older, the pattern became impossible to ignore. High school graduation, celebration in Hawaii. You'd be bored, sweetie. It's mostly golf and spa days. Emma's Sweet 16 cruise. You get seasick. Remember Jake's college acceptance celebration weekend in New York. We know you hate Broadway shows. The thing is, I never said I hated Broadway shows. I never complained about getting seasick. These weren't my preferences. They were assumptions my parents made and then turned into facts about who I was supposed to be. After college, when I started my career as a graphic designer, I hoped things would change. I had my own money, my own independence. I started planning my own trips, posting photos from solo adventures to Europe and South America. My parents would comment politely on social media, but the family vacation invitations never came. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when I arrived at my parents' house for our monthly dinner. I walked into the living room to find them huddled over photo albums with Jake and Emma, all of them laughing at pictures from what was clearly a recent trip. Beach photos, restaurant shots, group selfies, all taken during the week they told me they were staying local and just relaxing at home. "Oh, Sarah," my mom jumped up quickly, closing the album. Emma's face went red. Jake suddenly became very interested in his phone. The silence stretched uncomfortably, until I finally asked, "Where were these pictures taken?" "Just a little weekend thing," Dad said dismissively. "Nothing special. You know how you feel about beach trips." But I could see the resort bracelets still on Emma's wrist. I could see the professional vacation photographer's watermark on the photos that had slipped out of the album. This wasn't a weekend trip. This was a full family vacation planned and executed while they actively lied to me about their plans. That night I couldn't sleep. 22 years of exclusion, 22 years of being told I wouldn't enjoy something, wouldn't fit in, wouldn't want to join. I started thinking about all the family traditions I'd been systematically excluded from, all the bonding experiences I'd missed, all the memories that existed without me. The next morning I did something I'd never done before. I called Emma directly. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, how many family trips have there been that I wasn't invited to?" Another pause. Then quietly, "A lot." "How many is a lot?" "Sarah, maybe you should talk to Mom and Dad about this." "Emma, I'm asking you. As my sister." I heard her take a shaky breath. "Every year since you turned 12. Sometimes twice a year." "Sarah, I thought you knew. I thought you just didn't want to come." "Every year. For over 20 years. Dozens of trips, hundreds of family memories, thousands of moments of bonding and shared experiences, all happening while I was told there was no room, no budget, no point in including me." But Emma's next words changed everything. "I never understood why Mom and Dad said you wouldn't want to come though, especially since they always paid for everything from your college fund." I felt the world tilt. What did you say? Your college fund. The one Dad set up when you were born. He always said it was too much money to just let sit there, so every few years they'd use some of it for family trips. But they always said you preferred staying home anyway, so. My college fund. The money that was supposed to pay for my education that I'd taken out student loans for because my parents said they couldn't afford to help with college. The fund, they told me, had been lost in the market crash when I was 17. They'd been using my own money to pay for family vacations that I wasn't invited to. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had they excluded me for over 2 decades, they'd been funding their family bonding experiences with money that was legally mine, while I struggled through college with part-time jobs and graduated with $40,000 in student debt. I hung up with Emma and immediately called my grandmother, the only family member who'd always been honest with me. Grandma Rose, I need to ask you about my college fund. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Grandma. Oh, honey, she said softly. I was wondering when you'd find out. Grandma Rose's confirmation was like a cold slap of reality. She'd been the one to help my grandfather set up the original fund, $50,000, when I was born, meant to grow over 18 years to cover my education. She had all the paperwork. Your grandfather made me promise to let your parents handle it, she said, her voice heavy with regret. But Sarah, honey, I've watched them take that money for years. Every fancy vacation, every expensive restaurant bill, every designer hotel, I knew where the money was coming from. The math was devastating. Over 20 years of family trips funded by my college fund while I worked 3 jobs through school and lived on ramen noodles. While I graduated with crushing debt, my siblings got free vacation memories and 0 student loans. But Grandma Rose had kept meticulous records, bank statements, transaction histories, even photos from social media that she'd printed and dated. She'd been documenting everything, waiting for the day I'd ask the right questions. I have proof of everything, sweetheart. Every withdrawal, every trip, every lie they told you about market losses. That night I sat in my apartment with 20 years of evidence spread across my kitchen table. Credit card statements showing luxury resort charges, bank records showing systematic withdrawals from an education fund, social media photos time-stamped to match those exact charges. Even old text messages Emma had forgotten to delete where she'd complained to friends about having to keep family trips secret from me. The pattern was clear and calculated. This wasn't thoughtless favoritism. This was deliberate financial fraud and systematic emotional abuse, disguised as family preference. I'd spent 2 decades believing I was the family outsider by choice, that I simply didn't fit their lifestyle. But the truth was, they'd stolen my future to fund their present, then gaslit me into thinking it was my own fault for not belonging. Most people would have confronted them immediately. But I'm a graphic designer. I understand the power of careful planning, strategic timing, and perfect execution. I wasn't going to waste this opportunity on an emotional outburst that they could dismiss or deflect. Instead, I started planning. First, I consulted with a lawyer. The theft of education funds was a serious crime, especially when combined with the tax implications of using education money for luxury vacations. The lawyer was fascinated by the case, not just the financial fraud but the psychological manipulation component. This isn't just theft, she explained. This is long-term financial abuse designed to isolate and control. The fact that they convinced you that exclusion was your choice rather than their decision adds another layer of potential damages. Next, I reached out to a forensic accountant who specialized in family financial disputes. With Grandma Rose's records and my lawyer's subpoena power, we began building a comprehensive picture of 20 years of systematic theft. The numbers were staggering. $50,000 in principal plus 20 years of growth and interest minus legitimate educational expenses they never paid. They owed me over $120,000, not including the emotional damages from decades of systematic exclusion and gaslighting. But money wasn't my only goal. I wanted them to face the full consequences of their choices, and I wanted my siblings to understand exactly what they'd been complicit in. I started documenting everything from my end, too. Every conversation where they'd made excuses about not including me. Every time they'd claimed financial hardship while posting photos from expensive trips. Every family gathering where they'd made me feel like the problem for wanting to belong. Then I began my research into their current situation. Social media made it easy. They documented everything. Recent trips to Europe, expensive restaurants, designer purchases, home renovations, all funded by money that was legally mine, while they told extended family that I was just independent and preferred doing my own thing. The most damaging discovery came when I found their private family group chat. Emma had accidentally added me to a backup phone, and months of messages were suddenly visible. Messages about planning trips specifically when I'd be busy with work. Jokes about my awkward phase that apparently lasted 20 years. Complaints about having to make excuses for why I wasn't invited to family events. But the message that sealed their fate was from my mother to Emma: "Don't mention the Tuscany trip to Sarah. She's already suspicious about finances, and the last thing we need is her asking about college fund money again." They knew I was getting suspicious. They knew exactly what they'd done, and they were actively planning to continue hiding it from me. That's when I stopped feeling guilty about what I was planning to do to them. I spent the next week creating a comprehensive timeline of every lie, every theft, every moment of manipulation. I gathered evidence of their current financial situation, proof that they could easily repay what they'd stolen, and documentation of every family event I'd been excluded from while they used my money to fund their bonding experiences. But I also did something else. I started reaching out to extended family members. Aunts, uncles, cousins who'd always wondered why I never joined family trips. People who'd been told the same lies about my preferences and my independence. The conversations were eye-opening. Nobody had questioned the narrative my parents created, but when I presented them with evidence, their reactions were immediate and horrified. "I always thought it was strange," my Aunt Karen admitted. "You were such a social kid, but they always said you hated travel. It never made sense. I offered to pay for you to come on our family trip to Disney when you were 15, my Uncle Mike remembered. Your parents said you'd already made other plans, but now I'm wondering if you ever knew about the invitation." One by one, family members began sharing their own memories of times they'd tried to include me, only to be told by my parents that I wouldn't be interested or wouldn't fit in. The picture that emerged was devastating, not just of financial theft but of complete social manipulation designed to isolate me from my entire extended family. By the end of that week, I had a battle plan. Legal action for financial recovery, but also a comprehensive exposure of 20 years of systematic deception to every person who'd believed their lies about me. They'd spent 2 decades painting me as the family outsider who chose not to belong. Now it was time for everyone to learn the truth about who really didn't belong in this family. The next phase of my plan required careful coordination and perfect timing. I wasn't just seeking financial justice. I wanted complete exposure of the systematic deception that had shaped my entire family narrative for over 20 years. I started with my strongest ally, Grandma Rose. At 86, she was sharp as ever and absolutely furious about what her son and daughter-in-law had done to me. More importantly, she had legal standing as the co-creator of my original college fund. "I want to help you make this right," she said during our strategy meeting at her kitchen table. "Your grandfather would be rolling in his grave, knowing his money was used to exclude his granddaughter from her own family." Grandma Rose became my secret weapon. She began casually asking my parents about their recent trips during family phone calls, documenting their lies in real time. When they claimed they'd been staying local during weeks when I had photo evidence of European vacations, she'd gently press for details, creating a growing record of deliberate deception. But she also did something more subtle and devastating. She started asking them about my college expenses. "I was just thinking," she mentioned during one call, "Sarah did so well paying for school on her own. I remember how proud we all were of her independence. Though I always wondered what happened to that education fund we set up." The panic in their responses was telling. Suddenly they had elaborate stories about market crashes and investment losses that somehow never came up during the 20 years I'd been asking about college funding. Meanwhile, I was building my legal case with methodical precision. The forensic accountant had traced every dollar taken from my education fund, cross-referenced with credit card statements from luxury resorts and expensive restaurants during family trips. The pattern was undeniable. They'd systematically converted my educational money into their vacation experiences. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source: Emma's old laptop. When she'd asked to store some boxes at my apartment after a move, I'd agreed without thinking much about it. But when I was helping her retrieve something weeks later, her old laptop was accidentally turned on and years of saved conversations were suddenly visible. The messages revealed the true scope of their deception. Group chats between my parents and siblings planning family events specifically around my work schedule to ensure I'd be unavailable. Discussions about how to handle my questions about college funding. Even conversations about whether they should eventually tell me the truth about the education fund theft. The most chilling discovery was a message thread from when I was 19 asking why I couldn't join their Christmas vacation to Colorado. My mother's response to Emma: Sarah's too negative for family trips. She asks too many questions about money and makes everyone uncomfortable. It's better for family harmony if she thinks she's choosing not to come. My father's addition: plus we can afford better hotels if we don't have to cover her expenses too. They weren't just excluding me, they were actively crafting a narrative that made me believe I was choosing exclusion while they used my own money to upgrade their experiences. But Emma's response surprised me. I feel bad lying to her though. She seemed really hurt when I told her we went to Colorado without her. My mother's reply: she'll get over it. Sarah's always been dramatic. This way everyone's happier. Reading those words felt like a punch to the stomach. For 20 years I'd believed I was being dramatic for wanting to belong to my own family. They deliberately cultivated that belief while stealing from me behind my back. I screenshot everything before Emma came to collect her laptop. She never noticed the evidence I'd gathered, but the conversation when she picked up her things was telling. "You know, Sarah," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about our conversation about family trips." "What about it?" "Maybe you should talk to Mom and Dad. Like really talk to them. About everything." I could see the guilt in her eyes. She knew more than she'd admitted, and the weight of keeping their secrets was starting to affect her. "Maybe I will," I said carefully. "But Emma, can I ask you something? Do you think I would have enjoyed those trips if I'd been invited?" She looked genuinely confused by the question. "Of course you would have. You love travel, you love good food, you're great company." "I never understood why Mom and Dad said you wouldn't want to come." "They said I wouldn't want to come." Emma's face changed as she realized what she'd revealed. I mean, they said you preferred doing your own thing." "That's not what you just said." She stood there for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something. "Finally, Sarah, I think there are things about our family that I didn't understand when I was younger. Things that maybe I should have questioned." That conversation convinced me that Emma might be salvageable. Unlike Jake, who seemed perfectly content with the family hierarchy that benefited him, Emma was starting to see the cracks in our parents' narrative. I decided to test her loyalty. Over the next few weeks, I began casually mentioning specific family trips to Emma, asking innocent questions about details. Each conversation revealed more lies my parents had told about my supposed preferences and choices. "Remember, when you guys went to Napa for Mom's birthday, I always wondered why I wasn't invited to that." Emma's immediate defensiveness. "You hate wine tasting." "Do I? When have I ever said that?" The long pause that followed told me everything. Emma was beginning to realize that many of the things she knew about my preferences were actually things my parents had told her, not things I'd ever expressed myself. But the real breakthrough came when I mentioned the college fund situation to her directly. "Emma, I need to ask you something serious. Did you know that Mom and Dad used my college fund money for family trips?" Her face went completely white. "What?" "The education fund Grandpa set up for me. The one they told me was lost in the market crash. They've been using it to pay for family vacations for 20 years. Emma sat down hard on my couch. That's not possible. They always said you chose to pay for college yourself because you wanted to be independent." "I didn't choose anything. I thought the money was gone. I took out loans because they told me they couldn't help with college expenses." I watched understanding dawn on her face as she connected the dots. Every family trip she'd enjoyed, every expensive restaurant meal, every luxury hotel room, all funded by money that was supposed to pay for my education while I worked multiple jobs and accumulated massive debt. "Oh my God, Sarah. I had no idea." "But you knew about the fund originally, didn't you?" She nodded slowly. "When I turned 18, Dad mentioned that they'd done the same thing for all of us. set up education funds when we were born. But he said yours was different somehow. Different how? He said you'd made different choices about college, so they'd handled your fund differently. I assumed that meant you'd chosen not to use it. The manipulation was even deeper than I'd realized. They hadn't just stolen from me and excluded me, they'd created an entire false narrative about my choices and preferences that my siblings had internalized and repeated. But now Emma knew the truth, and I could see the guilt and anger warring on her face. She'd been unknowingly complicit in decades of systematic abuse, and the realization was destroying her. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth," I said. That's when I knew I was ready for the final phase of my plan. I had evidence, I had allies, and I had siblings who were starting to question everything they thought they knew about our family. The confrontation was coming, and after 20 years of being painted as the problem child who chose not to belong, I was finally ready to show them exactly what belonging to this family had cost me. Now that you've seen how deep this deception goes, you're probably wondering what happens when 20 years of lies finally get exposed. Stay tuned for the moment when my family finally faces the consequences of their choices, and trust me, they never saw it coming. I chose Thanksgiving for the confrontation. Not out of irony, but out of strategy. The entire extended family would be there: aunts, uncles, cousins, and Grandma Rose. Everyone who'd been fed lies about my preferences and independence would hear the truth simultaneously. I arrived early to help with dinner preparations, acting completely normal. My parents seemed pleased that I was being so family-oriented, making small talk about work and asking about their recent quiet weekend at home, which I knew from credit card statements was actually a luxury spa retreat in Vermont. As family members arrived, I made sure to greet everyone warmly, especially the relatives I'd grown closer to during my investigation. They knew something important was coming, but not exactly what. Dinner conversation was typical: work updates, travel stories, holiday plans. My parents regaled everyone with tales of their recent local adventures, carefully avoiding specifics that might contradict their cover stories. Jake dominated discussion about his new promotion, while Emma seemed unusually quiet. Then, during dessert, I made my move. "I have something I'd like to share with everyone," I announced, standing up with a folder in my hands. "It's about family traditions and the importance of honesty." My mother's smile faltered slightly. "Sarah, maybe this isn't the right time." "Actually, this is the perfect time. Because what I want to talk about affects everyone at this table." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. 23 years ago, Grandpa and Grandma Rose set up a $50,000 education fund for me. The money was meant to pay for my college expenses. The room was completely silent now. My father's face had gone ashen. But when I applied for college, my parents told me the fund had been lost in a market crash. So I took out $40,000 in student loans and worked 3 jobs to pay for school. I pulled out bank statements and handed them to my Aunt Karen. "These are the actual records of that education fund. As you can see, there was no market crash. The money was systematically withdrawn over 20 years to fund family vacations that I was never invited to." The papers passed from hand to hand around the table. I watched my family's faces change as they realized what they were seeing. Proof of deliberate theft and 20 years of calculated lies. "Sarah," my mother said shakily, "you don't understand the full situation." "I understand perfectly. These are conversations between family members planning trips specifically when I'd be unavailable, discussing how to hide these vacations from me and making jokes about my awkward phase that apparently lasted 2 decades. My Uncle Mike was studying the bank records with growing anger. "Tom, these withdrawals, some of them are for $15,000, $20,000 at a time, for vacations." My father couldn't meet his eyes. "We always plan to pay it back." "With what money?" I continued. "You've spent the last year telling extended family that you're worried about retirement finances, but these credit card statements show luxury resort charges from last month." I placed restaurant receipts and hotel bills on the table. 5-star restaurants in Tuscany while you told me you were staying home because of budget concerns. Designer hotel suites in Paris while I was asking if you needed help with groceries. Grandma Rose spoke up from her seat at the head of the table. "I've been watching this happen for 20 years. I kept hoping they'd do the right thing, but instead the lies just got bigger. The room erupted. Aunts and uncles who'd believed the story about my independence and preference for solitude were furious. Cousins who'd been told I was too busy or not interested in family gatherings realized they'd been fed deliberate misinformation. But the most devastating moment came when I pulled out the final document. This is a forensic accounting report. The total amount stolen from my education fund, including interest and growth over 20 years, is $123,000. But the emotional damage of being systematically excluded from my own family and gaslit into believing it was my choice, that's incalculable. Emma started crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use to get out of trouble as a kid, but genuine sobs of guilt and realization. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know they were using your money." "But you knew about the lies," I said gently but firmly. "You knew I wasn't choosing to be excluded. You knew they were making excuses about why I couldn't come on family trips." Jake finally spoke up. "So what, you want us to pay you back? We didn't know where the money was coming from." The selfishness of his response stunned even our relatives. No apology, no acknowledgement of the harm done, just immediate concern about financial consequences. "Jake," our Uncle Mike said coldly, "your sister was systematically robbed and excluded from her own family for 20 years. Your first thought is about money." "Actually," I said, "Jake raises an interesting point about financial responsibility. Because according to my lawyer, everyone who knowingly participated in this conspiracy could be held liable for damages." My parents exchanged panicked looks. They hadn't expected legal consequences. "You're suing us?" my mother asked incredulously. "I'm giving you a choice," I replied. "Full restitution of the stolen funds, public acknowledgement of what you did to me, and genuine effort to repair the damage to my relationships with extended family members who were lied to about me. Or we go to court and let a judge decide appropriate damages for financial theft and 20 years of psychological abuse." The silence stretched painfully until my cousin Sarah spoke up. "I want to apologize to you. All those times I invited you to things and your parents said you weren't interested. I should have asked you directly." One by one, extended family members began acknowledging how they'd been manipulated into excluding me. The picture emerged of a systematic campaign to isolate me, not just from my immediate family, but from every family connection I might have built. My parents sat in stunned silence as their carefully constructed narrative crumbled around them. 20 years of lies exposed in 20 minutes with the entire family as witnesses. But the real victory came when Emma stood up and walked over to me. "I'm sorry," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry I believed their lies about you. I'm sorry I didn't question why you never came on trips. And I'm sorry it took me this long to realize that the sister I thought I knew was actually the person they wanted me to think you were." The Thanksgiving dinner that was supposed to celebrate family traditions became the day our family finally learned the truth about what traditions really cost. The hours following my Thanksgiving revelation were chaos. Extended family members left early, many stopping to apologize personally and exchange contact information with me directly. The lies my parents had told about my preferences and personality had affected relationships I didn't even know I'd lost. My Aunt Karen hugged me tightly before leaving. "I'm ashamed that I never questioned their story about you. You were always such a sweet social kid. I should have known something was wrong when they said you preferred being alone." My Uncle Mike was more direct. "Tom, Linda, I don't know who you think you are, but what you did to Sarah is unforgivable. Don't expect us to pretend this didn't happen." One by one, relatives who'd believed the narrative about my independence and antisocial tendencies realized how thoroughly they'd been manipulated. Phone numbers were exchanged, invitations, extended relationships I'd thought were lost forever suddenly became possible again. But the most important moment came when my cousin Jennifer pulled me aside. "Sarah, I need you to know something. 3 years ago, when I was planning my wedding, I specifically asked your parents if you'd want to be a bridesmaid. Your mom told me you'd be uncomfortable with that kind of attention and preferred not to be in wedding parties." I felt my heart drop. "I never knew you were getting married." "They said you knew, but were too busy with work to attend. I sent the invitation to their house because I didn't have your current address. Another milestone stolen from me, another relationship damaged by their systematic lies. How many other life events had I missed because my parents convinced people I wasn't interested in participating? Meanwhile, Jake and my parents huddled in the kitchen, voices raised in angry whispers. I caught fragments of their conversation. Concerns about legal liability, anger at me for airing family business, and blame shifting about whose idea the vacation funding scheme had been originally. Emma, however, stayed in the living room with me and Grandma Rose. I need to know everything, she said quietly. Every lie they told me about you, every time they manipulated me into excluding you. I can't live with this guilt unless I understand the full scope of what I was part of. Over the next hour, I walked her through 20 years of systematic exclusion. Every family trip she remembered, I showed her the corresponding lie I'd been told about why I couldn't attend. Every time she'd asked why I wasn't included in family activities, I revealed what our parents had told me about not being invited. The pattern was devastating and consistent. They'd created parallel narratives, telling extended family I was independent and preferred solitude, telling me I wasn't invited or wouldn't enjoy activities, and telling my siblings that I'd made different choices. About family involvement. The skiing trip when I was 16, Emma said suddenly. You asked me why you couldn't come and I said Mom told me you hated skiing. But you'd never been skiing. How could you hate something you'd never tried? What did Mom actually tell you about why I couldn't come? Emma's face crumpled. She said you'd already made other plans and weren't interested in family time anyway. But I remember now. You didn't have other plans. You were home alone that whole week. Each revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd been the intermediary for many of their lies, unknowingly delivering messages that reinforced my exclusion while believing she was just explaining my preferences. But the worst discovery came when she remembered Christmas 2 years ago. Oh God, Sarah. The Christmas gift exchange. Mom said you didn't want to participate because you thought our family gift traditions were silly, so we didn't get you anything. I stared at her. I was never told there was a gift exchange. I brought presents for everyone and felt terrible when no one had anything for me. I thought I'd misunderstood the plan. You sat there, opening nothing while we all exchanged gifts, and we thought you preferred it that way. The cruelty was breathtaking. They'd orchestrated a Christmas morning where I appeared to be choosing not to participate in family traditions, while I was actually being systematically excluded from traditions I didn't know existed. Emma broke down completely. I've been complicit in torturing you for years and I didn't even know it. Every time I repeated their explanations about your choices, I was helping them gaslight you. Grandma Rose, who'd been listening quietly, finally spoke up. Emma, honey, you were a child when this started. They manipulated you just as much as they manipulated Sarah. The difference is that Sarah was the target and you were the weapon they used against her. From the kitchen, we could hear the argument escalating. Jake's voice carried clearly. This is ridiculous. So what if we used her college money? She turned out fine anyway. She has a good job, her own place. What's she complaining about? The absolute lack of empathy in his response was stunning. Even after hearing evidence of 20 years of systematic theft and emotional abuse, his primary concern was justifying their actions rather than acknowledging the harm they'd caused. My father's response was equally telling. The problem is that Sarah always made everything about herself. We tried to include her when she was younger, but she was difficult. This whole situation just proves that we made the right choice keeping family activities peaceful. They were rewriting history in real time, turning my legitimate desire to belong into evidence that I deserved exclusion. But my mother's voice cut through their justifications with sharp panic. Forget about whether we were right or wrong. She has a lawyer. She has bank records. If this goes to court, we could lose the house. The financial reality was finally sinking in. $123,000 in stolen education funds, plus potential damages for emotional distress, plus legal fees. Their comfortable retirement, funded partially by my stolen money, was suddenly at risk. Emma looked at me with genuine fear. Sarah, you're not really going to sue them, are you? That depends entirely on them, I said honestly. I gave them a choice. Full accountability and restitution or legal consequences. They can decide which path they prefer. But even as I said it, I could hear them in the kitchen choosing denial and defensiveness over accountability. Jake was already planning how to hide assets. My parents were discussing whether they could claim the education fund had been a gift rather than a trust. They were choosing to dig deeper rather than come clean. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end with family reconciliation and heartfelt apologies. They'd had 20 years to do the right thing and multiple opportunities during today's confrontation to take responsibility for their choices. Instead, they were doubling down on the same patterns that had caused this situation in the first place: lies, manipulation, and complete disregard for anyone's feelings except their own. As I gathered my things to leave, Emma grabbed my arm. "Please don't disappear from my life because of what they did. I want to make this right somehow." Looking at her tear-stained face, I saw genuine remorse and a sister I'd thought I'd lost forever. "You're not responsible for their choices, Emma. But from now on, any relationship we have has to be between us directly. No more accepting their version of what I think or want." She nodded eagerly. "I want to know you. The real you, not the version they created." Walking out of that house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 20 years: clarity about who my real family was and who deserved my energy going forward. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment with Emma, planning our first sister vacation together. A trip to Ireland that we're paying for, with the settlement money my parents finally agreed to pay rather than face. Criminal charges for education fund fraud. The legal resolution came faster than expected. When my lawyer presented evidence of systematic theft from an education trust combined with tax fraud from using education funds for non-qualified expenses, my parents' attorney advised immediate settlement. They paid full restitution plus damages totaling nearly $150,000, but the money, while satisfying, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was the family I discovered I'd always had, just hidden behind 20 years of lies. My cousin Jennifer's wedding do-over brunch became a celebration of authentic relationships. Aunts and uncles who'd been told I was antisocial were amazed to discover I was actually quite social, just excluded. Extended family members began sharing stories of times they'd tried to include me over the years, only to be told by my parents that I wouldn't be interested or available. "I invited you to my graduation party when I finished nursing school," my cousin Mark revealed. "Your mom said you were going through a difficult phase and preferred not to attend social events." "I never heard about your graduation," I told him. "I would have loved to celebrate with you." One by one, we reconstructed 20 years of missed connections and stolen relationships. The picture that emerged was of a large, loving, extended family that had wanted to include me all along, systematically prevented from doing so by two people who'd decided I didn't fit their image of family harmony. Emma became my strongest ally in rebuilding these connections. She started hosting family gatherings specifically designed to include me in conversations and traditions I'd missed. More importantly, she began the hard work of examining her own assumptions about family loyalty and questioning narratives she'd never thought to challenge. "I realized I don't actually know Jake very well either," she admitted during one of our weekly sister dinners. "I know the version of him that Mom and Dad approve of, but I've never asked him what he actually thinks or feels about anything controversial." The insight was profound. My parents hadn't just manipulated my relationships. They'd controlled the entire family dynamic by deciding who got to be authentic and who had to conform to their expectations. Jake unfortunately chose conformity over truth. When I reached out to build a genuine relationship with him separate from our parents' influence, he declined. He preferred the version of family hierarchy that benefited him, even after learning it was built on theft and lies. "I don't see what good it does to rehash old family drama," he said during our last conversation. "Mom and Dad made their choices, you got your money back, everyone should just move on." His inability to acknowledge the emotional damage or show genuine remorse made it clear that any relationship with him would require me to accept continued dismissal of my experiences. I chose my own peace instead. My parents predictably tried multiple strategies to avoid accountability even after paying the settlement. They attempted to play victim, claiming I'd destroyed the family over money. They tried guilt, suggesting that pursuing legal action proved I'd never really loved them. They even tried manipulation, having flying monkeys from their friend circle reach out to suggest I was being ungrateful and vindictive. But the most revealing response came in a letter my mother sent 3 months after the settlement, asking if we could start fresh and put this unpleasantness behind us so we could be a normal family again. The letter contained no apology for 20 years of theft and exclusion, no acknowledgement of the psychological damage they'd caused, no recognition that their unpleasantness had shaped my entire adult life and cost me decades of family relationships. Just a request to pretend none of it had happened so they could feel better about themselves. I didn't respond to the letter, but I did frame it as a reminder of why I'd made the right choice in pursuing legal action. Some people are constitutionally incapable of genuine accountability, and my parents had proven to be exactly that type of people. The real healing came through building the family relationships I'd always wanted. Grandma Rose and I now have weekly coffee dates, where she shares stories about my grandfather and helps me understand family history I'd been excluded from. We're planning a trip to visit his hometown in Ireland, something she'd wanted to do with a grandchild for years. My Aunt Karen invited me to join her book club, where I discovered a love for literary fiction that I'd never had time to explore during my work-heavy college years. My Uncle Mike includes me in his family's holiday traditions, treating me like the daughter he never had. Most surprisingly, several extended family members apologized for not questioning my parents' narrative sooner and began inviting me to milestone events I'd missed for years. I was a bridesmaid in my cousin's wedding renewal, attended my teenage cousin's graduation, and hosted Christmas dinner for relatives who wanted to celebrate with the real me rather than the fictional version my parents had created. Emma and I travel together now, creating the sisterly bond we'd been prevented from developing. Our Ireland trip will be our third vacation together, and each one has strengthened our relationship while healing years of manufactured distance. I keep thinking about all the conversations we could have had over the years, she told me recently. All the support we could have given each other if they hadn't convinced me you didn't want a close relationship with family. We're having those conversations now, I reminded her. That's what matters. The most unexpected gift has been discovering who I actually am without the constant background narrative of being the family outsider. For 20 years, I'd believed I was independently minded, antisocial, and difficult to please because that's how I'd been trained to see myself. But surrounded by people who actually wanted my company, I discovered I'm actually quite social, adventurous, and easy to please. I love travel, enjoy fancy restaurants, and thrive in group settings. Everything my parents claimed I disliked, I actually enjoy when I'm not being systematically excluded from it. The woman they painted as preferring solitude and independence was actually just a woman who'd been isolated and abandoned, making the best of a situation she'd been convinced was her choice. Today, I'm planning a family reunion for the extended family members who want authentic relationships. Grandma Rose will be the guest of honor, celebrating her 87th birthday surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren who finally know the truth about our family history. My parents won't be invited, and neither will Jake. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I've learned that some people are committed to dysfunction, and the healthiest response is to build your life around people who are committed to growth instead. As I finish writing this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever questioned family narratives that seem designed to exclude or diminish someone? Have you experienced situations where family loyalty was used to silence legitimate concerns about harmful behavior? Whether you've been the target of family scapegoating or witnessed it happening to someone else, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, setting boundaries, and finding your authentic self. And if you know someone who's struggling with toxic family relationships, please share this story. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to my journey from family scapegoat to chosen family creator. Remember that you deserve relationships based on truth, respect, and genuine love. And sometimes finding those relationships means walking away from the people who are committed to keeping you small. Here's to building families based on choice rather than obligation, and to the beautiful life that becomes possible when you stop accepting other people's definitions of who you're supposed to be.